Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Easter. We are going to take a break from the COVID cast today, and today it is going to be the Culture Cast with my guest, Angela Brown. We're going to talk about the film American Factory. So, if you like what you see, hit the like, thumb, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and you will get a lot of great content because I'm cranking these out every day. Okay? Welcome to the Rick Richards Show. Let's get it started. So tonight, we are going to take a break from the COVID cast. You know what? It's Easter Sunday. Let's do something a little bit different. Let's take a break from the COVID cast. Out here on the West Coast, it is a beautiful day. Isolation chamber or not. I got a few friends with me. I got Ivan, the floor director, with me, although he almost killed the power. So we are going to take a break from the doom and the gloom of the COVID cast, and we are going to do something a little bit different tonight. I'm going to be joined by my co-host, Angela Brown from New York City, wearing an attractive green, what do you call that, blouse?
It's yellow for Easter.
Ah, I see. Very revealing. I see a little cleavage there. That's perfect. That's how we get the viewers.
Well, thank you. I don't think I've ever had anyone tell me I have cleavage ever, so.
Okay, well, this is a first then, right? So I'm going to do, so tonight we're not doing the COVID cast, we are doing the Culture Cast. And the Culture Cast, Angela and I are going to look at two films that were shot 30 years apart. So one of them is kind of a goofy sort of feel-good comedy from the 80s starring Michael Keaton called Gung Ho. And the other one is a documentary that's out on Netflix right now called American Factory. There's going to be a few spoilers. I mean, Gung Ho came out, 34 years ago. So don't worry about the spoilers on that one. But before we do, I'm going to do some shout outs first. So shout outs to producer Dave and his buddy Odell, Terry, Jixer, Tom, the bot, superfan Julia, floor director Ivan, of course, Diana, Vanessa, Kushi, my old gray-haired daddy, if he ever figures out how the YouTubes work. Who else do I have shout-outs to? Oh, Kim, Tammy, friend of the show, Lisa, Carol, Grace, Rick, Dwayne. That should do it. How about you, Angie? Any shout-outs?
Yeah, shout out to Vanessa and Diana and Kushi and Ivan. I miss you and happy Easter to them.
Okay.
And also to mom and dad.
Shout out to Suki.
Yeah.
Suki the cat's in the background. Casually looking away from the camera. Look at her. She doesn't look impressed.
She's very chill.
Okay. Okay. So what I often like to do is I often like to see how a certain subject is portrayed over the course of time, right? Like I like to watch how they projected the future, say back in the 80s or the 70s, as compared to how people project the future now, right? And a lot of times the way things are projected in film are more a reflection of the contemporary times, right? So you watched Gung Ho, right? So let's start off and let's do kind of a broad 50,000 foot overview of both films. I'll let you start.
Well, first of all, Gung Ho is a comedy, and looking back, it's a comedy basically about two very clashing cultures trying to get together to make something work. Yeah. In United States. So there's a failing auto body part or car, factory. The Japanese come in, they're way more efficient. They think the Americans are fat and have fat fingers and slow. And basically they want to streamline the process to make it faster. But in the process, they're not thinking about human life, quality of life, injuries, all that sort of stuff. They're not seeing the humans as humans. And in this movie, basically, in a nutshell, the Americans teach the Japanese how to be human, and the Japanese teach the Americans how to streamline and be more efficient, basically.
Yeah, how to roll with the times, kind of, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. The word gung ho is actually a Chinese word, and it means like like a collective working group. It was a word that came right out of just after World War II, and gung ho means like kind of a sort of a targeted collective working group. But it's interesting in a film that portrays a Japanese culture coming to do business there, that they use the word gung ho, right?
Yeah.
And
Also
it's
incorrect.
also interesting that if we go back and if we view things through a 1980s lens, you know, at the time it very much was Japan, right? Japan was you know, producing so much stuff. The Sony Corporation was huge at the time. Japanese vehicles were just really building their reputation as good quality and low price. There was a recognition. The whole United States, the whole American manufacturing system had begun to start to fragment. So Henry Ford had developed the production line, right? Mass assembly and the production line. This was sort of a late stage advancement on industrialization. And essentially what he had developed is, you know, instead of having one man build a car and 40 men build 40 cars, he would have one man add a part, and then that way 40 men could build 400 cars, right? It was extremely efficient, you know, a mechanized way, and it sort of kicked off that whole industrial heartland. Well, maybe not the industrial heartland, but certainly America as the manufacturing leader of the world. I mean, America had been moving in that direction anyway. But then, you know, with GM and the other big companies, they were offering double the, I think it was double the average wage for people to come from all over America and work there. So it's really, it's fascinating that, you know, in the space of, I guess, when was Ford building the Model T? Probably in the, maybe just after the war, so sometime around there, but in the space of 40 or 50 years, they had gone from needing American workers and offering double the average to under threat from foreign countries that had a different approach to business and, you know, that sort of thing. So it's interesting that that was kind of the starting point for when the effects of globalization really started to take root, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Any other observations on gung ho?
Um, well, I mean, just um, no, not really on an ethical point. Not that I could recall right now. I mean, I've seen it once, just quickly, but no. Let's
Yeah,
just
I
move.
think gung ho really just serves as kind of I don't know, kind of a precursor, right, to American Factory. American Factory is the main one we're going to be talking about, but it's just interesting that gung ho, it is a comedy, right, and people tend to be dismissive of the cultural impact of comedies, but I actually think I actually think they do hold a lot of weight in terms of cultural impact. Comedy tends to bring people's guards down. They're a little more open and receptive to the sorts of things that they're seeing, and what Gung Ho did is Gung Ho sort of paved the way for us to reach an understanding that, hey, you know, if a foreign company is coming in and they're buying a factory, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They're going to learn and they're going to adapt to us, and we're going to learn and we're going to adapt to them, and we'll kind of meld these things, and that's the American experience, and we'll keep going, right? That's sort of the
Yeah,
message you come away with from that film, right?
yeah, that's the message. And that's the message back then. And that's the message we would all love to experience right now. But I think people are way too polarized right now in their opinions to actually come together and work together. But
Yeah.
that,
So let's move on to actually, you know what? Before we move on to American Factory, actually give us a quick top line of American Factory from your perspective.
well, American Factory is a documentary essentially about a Chinese company coming in and merging with an American company. And there's a lot of cultural clashes there. Yeah, there's a,
Yeah. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell. And
yeah.
there's a long and people tend to people tend to compartmentalize different aspects, right? Like sports are just sports. demographics are demographics, business is business. These are all just small pieces of the whole. But really, there's a lot more to it than that. Um, you know, the human existence is usually boils down to a battle for resources, um, contracting powers, expanding powers, and there's a long history of um, trade and business that are, you know, both cooperative and coercive between China and the Western powers. Initially, trade started with between England, the East India Trade Company, and the British government started with China in the 1300s, and it was a very one-sided relationship at the time. In other words, the British would and other Europeans would primarily purchase silk and tea and stuff like that, and the Chinese were like, ah, yeah, we're good. We're happy to sell you stuff. Don't really want to buy any of your shit, okay? And it was kind of that way for a while, and until the Industrial Revolution. And then the Industrial Revolution came along, and this led to you know, an acceleration in the ability of the British technologically and in terms of weapons to say to China, yeah, look, you know, this relationship we've had so far, it's not really working. This is a nice country. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to it. So they kind of forced open all the Chinese ports and said, look, from now on, we have quotas of textiles. It was particularly textiles like cotton and linen and stuff like that. Textiles, you're going to be purchasing these from us, okay? We have quotas. We want to fill the quotas. And China tried to fight it, and they got the shit kicked out of them. And so basically they said, okay, I guess that's the way it is, right? So that kicked off another phase of the trading and the business relationship, the commercial relationship between, you know, loosely the West and China, right? And China was resentful of this and unhappy with it, but there wasn't a whole lot they could do about it. And then around 1899, 1900, there was something known as the Boxer Rebellion. And there was a group in China that they were sort of an underground group, and they were very resentful towards outsiders, foreigners, right? You may call them xenophobic or racist or whatever, but that was their approach. They trained fighting, and they were very resentful to foreigners in general, and you know, the kind of dictatorial trading terms that were being imposed upon them. And so they formed a rebellion. They killed a bunch of foreigners, a bunch of Europeans. They killed them and tried to get them out of the country. And then, of course, Europe ganged up on them and fought back along with Japan. Actually, Japan said, hey, a chance to kick China in the head, let's do it. And they got in there, right? So that squashed the Boxer Rebellion. And then most people know where we are from that point on. China was sort of demoted into an agrarian society for much of the first half of the 20th century. Then following the war, they began their, you know, communism took root, and they began their, I guess, their collective drive towards national improvement, you could say. So that brings us up to the current day, right? And we look at American Factory, and American Factory, contrary to something like Gung Ho, and who was the, do you know who directed and wrote the film?
Oh my God, I didn't even look. I didn't even look at that.
You know what? I know who it is. Hang on a second. Let me find her. I believe it's a woman named Julie. It was Julie Reichert, I think her name was. And she describes herself as, oh man, it's either Joan or Julie Reichert.
I can look it up.
You know what? I'll find it here. Hang on. Hang on. I'll have it in 2 seconds here. Yeah, Julia Reichert. She describes herself as she's a self-described radical feminist. And, you know, she's been around quite a while. She graduated from film school in 1964. She also directed the film, The Last Truck. It was about the last truck leaving the GM factory, I think in 2009. And they had started off this film basically just to do sort of a changing landscape in the American economy, very much like, you know, the Michael Moore films like Roger and Me.
Yeah.
And as they started, it became much more of a story about the workers themselves, right?
Yes.
And I think almost unintentionally, it became a it became a story of a clash of cultures, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
So what were some of the things that stood out to you in the film?
Well, some of the things that stood out to me was the lack of care for individual human beings. And a lot of these people are getting paid peanuts. And a lot of these people are hardworking people. And they have multiple jobs. They can't work fast enough to make these people happy. So it's all about the numbers. To me, it seemed apparent that it's only a question of time before all of this is automated, because human beings, American human beings at least, can't produce fast enough to please China's quotas.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I found I found it, the film heartbreaking in a way.
It's
Because,
super heartbreaking because all these people that in the areas where this factory is, and also down in the South, where there are no jobs, everybody is so impoverished. I don't think the rest of the world really realizes how impoverished a lot of the United States is. And these people just want to work. They just want a job. And to be told that you're too slow, you're doing your best, to get fired because you're not fast enough. It just really sucks when you're doing your best.
yeah, and I mean, some of the stories, they are pretty sad. I mean, there's one woman that was making $29 an hour when it was a GM plant, right? And
Yes,
then she was making $12 an hour.
that's exactly the example I was thinking.
Yeah, and they went from 10,000 workers down to 3,000 or 2,000, and they brought in, they started off with an American management team, and then they decided that the management team was absolutely not good enough, right?
Right, they lost them all.
And it's one thing I found really striking, and I mean, this is really heartbreaking as well, because as much as you would want, a happy ending or a happy story in America, it doesn't look like that's attainable, because if you look at the people themselves, I don't think there's a single person that was over the age of 30 that looks healthy and fit.
No, a lot of them looked overweight, complacent, yeah, like
Yeah,
they're living sedentary lifestyles.
well, just they just don't look fit for purpose, especially next to the Chinese. I mean, it was really interesting when a group of them went over to China, right?
Yeah,
And you see them. I mean, you wouldn't see a more stereotypical depiction if you were watching The Simpsons, right? Like
right.
it's a whole group of them getting out at the airport. Every one of them is fat, right?
Waddling,
Yeah, they're waddling, and they just look. Things are looking.
lost.
Yeah, they look lost and dazed and confused, and they're dressed like slobs, right? Well, the Chinese around them are doing parades for the advancement of the company, and they're all fit and they're choreographed and they're enthusiastic and they embrace every job, you know.
Yeah,
And if they work 12 hours a day, they feel like they're lucky. If they get a day off a month, that's they're being rewarded.
yeah, one day off a month.
And you look at this and you just think, there's absolutely no way Americans can compete with this. There's no way.
No, culturally, I mean, from what I understand, the Chinese, they became that way because they were very poor and they had to really work together to bring themselves up. And yeah, just like the Japanese, very team mentality. Americans are very individualistic. They're all about their individual rights, their rights to bear arms, their right to buy health insurance if they want, or not to buy health insurance, but definitely not working as a team. I don't think the idea of working as a team in America is very different than the idea of working as a team in China. And the idea, what the Chinese are grateful for is very different than what Americans are grateful for.
Yeah, well, you know what? You bring up a really good point, actually. See, one of the things we see here is we see the manifestation of an individualist society, right, versus
Yeah,
a collective society.
yeah,
And when you have an individualist society competing against a collectivist society, one of them's getting wiped out, right? And it's
yes,
not going to be the collectivist society. It's like two teams trying to play soccer. One team is passing with the other ones. The others are just trying to do everything themselves, right? Like there's no chance that they're going to win. And the collectivist society, they make sacrifices, but they, as a whole, they move progressively closer towards a better lifestyle and all of these things, right?
Yeah, but individual health and acknowledgement is not really a consideration there as much as it is here.
Right, but see, that's what's interesting, though, right? Um, there's more concern for safety and health and individual rights amongst the Americans,
Yeah.
yet none of the Americans look healthier or wealthier or any safer. Like pursuing the individualist ideal, it seems very short term, and the collective, you get a lot of the individualist goals through the collective eventually, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, obviously people here have a good understanding of what they can and cannot do to remain safe. I think what happens, the reason why a lot of people are looking so unhealthy is because they are working 2 or 3 jobs. They're run ragged. The last thing they're going to think about is paying attention to their own health. They're going, that's just the last thing that they're going to do. Yeah, I'm not quite sure why I went on that tangent, but.
Well, and just sort of moving on from the group of Americans that were invited to China, I mean, when you look at that, I don't think we would have seen that like 50 or 60 years ago. You know what I mean? Like in the 1950s, if you took a group of Americans and brought them over to China, I just don't think you would see confused, fat, dopey looking people wandering around,
No. Well, I mean, there was a much different portrayal in the media of Americans back then. They were much more savvy. They were like advertising men, or they were pilots, all these advertising pilots, big jobs. Everybody was much swankier. They all dressed really nicely. Nobody dresses up anymore. But the thing that really blew me away was how open they were in this documentary, showing the Chinese opinion of the Americans. And even that one guy that spoke extremely fluent Chinese over there, the way he talked about his own people, assuming he's from America, I don't know, was really degrading.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Actually, you know what? I think I have a clip from one of those. Do I have a clip from one of those? So there was a guy that became the president. Hang on a second here. You still there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah. It was interesting to just watch the sort of the team meetings of let's say the one head Chinese guy talking to his workers, telling them basically, this is what Americans are like. They all think they're special. Therefore they all have way too much confidence. They're all overconfident. Just the way he was briefing his people on how to handle an American individual was also super eye-opening.
Yeah, it was extremely blunt, wasn't it? And
it was very blunt and very transparent, actually.
Yeah, and true, I think you would have to say. So there's this one scene where they had fired the American president, and they hired a guy that was Chinese American. So, and this is what can you see the subtitles there?
When you're the rabbit, yes.
Yeah, it won't show the picture, but.
美国27年，中国26年。如果别人说的话，大概你40多岁，我53岁哈。为什么呢？因为我有激情，我有 passion， 就是我有要干事情，我干好。
A major shakeup of the company's senior management team, with company president John Gutierrez and vice president.
So it doesn't. The rest of it's cut out now, but so the president came out, and he lived in America for 27 years and China for 26. So he had spent more time in America, but he was talking to everybody and basically just saying to them, look, we're Chinese, okay? We're essentially better. All of you were born to a Chinese mother. This is the Chinese way. And I just thought it was interesting that clearly his identity is as Chinese, right? He identifies as someone who is Chinese, and yet all the Americans, to all the Americans, your identity is as easy to change as, you know, a photo, right? If you live in America, then hey, you're American. But to him, if you're born from a Chinese mother, that's it. You're Chinese. It doesn't matter if you're living on the moon, right?
Yes.
And when I heard that, I just thought, wow, these guys, they're just really up against it in terms of defending their own interests, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I found that really revealing and really shocking. And here's a guy that also, he lived amongst Americans for 27 years.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, he's telling, they had decided to bring in all Chinese managers, right? And just use the Americas as the sort of mules.
Yeah.
And he had basically said to them, look, when you pat a donkey, you stroke it with the fur, not against the fur.
I will never forget that analogy.
Yeah. So, I mean, the workers are donkeys, right?
Yes.
And like, don't upset the donkey. Give it what it wants until you take it out back and shoot it, right?
Yes.
And there was another guy. His name was Roy. He was an older guy. He was the furnace operator.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that was really sad because he had become really close friends with one of the Chinese workers there. I think his name was Leon or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And he had him on his farm. He was showing him all these American things, and you could see he's a guy that had completely embraced all the things that he was supposed to embrace, right? Like, hey, we're co-workers, we're going to be friends. This is just the same as a guy that's grown up down the street and lived with me forever. You know, I'm totally open and all this stuff. And then at the end, he was fired, right? This brother of his, this guy who he called his brother. Oh, well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think definitely these are two cultures that, I mean, clearly United States and China constantly work together in the garment industry and all that. But their ideologies are just so different. And that guy was like super, oh yeah, he's a good guy. Yeah, I'm going to fire, he's not going to be here in 2 weeks. And so easy to say that. And it's like, I didn't sense any emotion coming from him. Whereas all the Americans, when they were trying to get to know the Chinese, there was a lot of emotion there, especially when they went to China.
Well, yeah, I mean, they got people saying, you're part of the family, you're part of this. And it's you can really see the transition from one civilization to the next, right? Like, I mean, I don't think you can watch something like this and not see America as a civilization in decline, can you?
No, impossible.
I mean, you know, there's just I mean, and this just isn't isolated. That's the thing, right? I mean, we see you know, every piece of America essentially is in the process or has been carved up and outsourced. Like they've taken this you know, this business at all costs or GDP at all costs attitude to its extreme conclusion. And you know, and Donald Trump, like, I mean, Donald Trump, the reason he galvanized so much support in his campaign is because people like that, they saw him as a lifeline, right? They said, okay, here's a guy that's saying America first. Here's a guy that's going to bring back the glory days. That's going to bring back the factories and all that shit. And of course, I mean, it's all turned out to be a lie, right? Trump.
It's a lie. And plus, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, Trump sold them. He sold them a bill of goods, right? And, you know, there is no cavalry coming for them. You know, Bernie Sanders is another guy that was kind of trying to champion this class, that he was going to stand up to the establishment, but he wouldn't even stand up to the establishment within his own party, right? So I won't get too political because I think this kind of situation, it transcends both parties. I don't think it's a Republican or a Democratic issue. But it is just interesting that they keep looking for someone to save them, but there's no one coming to save them.
And they pick a president that is going to put them in the ground faster than anyone else. You know, like it's funny. A lot of the people that are voting for Republicans, or a lot of Republicans, probably want the benefits of a Democratic Party ruling. You know, it's what they need to survive.
Yeah, maybe it's hard to say, right? I think they're just both. They're tuned out of both parties. I think it's you know, I mean, whichever party's in, this process seems to continue. Like nobody's put a stop to it, right? Nobody's made any effort. And we see this is happening in the manufacturing industry, but I think you could probably make this film in the tech industry, right? With
Yeah.
H-1B visas, you know, outsourcing to places like India. You could make this in the probably the farming industry. I don't know, maybe textiles and garments. You tell me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a similar process going on in that area as well?
Yes, yeah. So I mean, with my own personal experience working in the accessory garment world for 15 years, one of the jobs I had, I remember having a conversation in the bathroom with a woman that worked in accounting, and she was in the process of trying to get her hairdresser's license so she can change careers, and she was in full-on panic mode because the company was planning on moving to China because they didn't want to pay American workers anymore. They just wanted to move the whole accessory business over to China, and they started actually bringing Chinese designers in, and then we had to train the Chinese designers. So we were essentially training the Chinese designers to take over our jobs. Yeah, and that company, I'm not sure how they're doing right now. I know they're not in New York. I know stuff happened to them. They at least moved out to New Jersey, but they definitely pumped up their Chinese office space and their Chinese workers and all that. No, people just don't want to pay.
And you know, one other interesting thing I thought of is in that film Gung Ho, they had an opening ceremony and the local politician came out. I can't remember if it was a governor or a senator or whatever it was, and he came out and did his speech and all that, and he was very clear to them. Look, I don't want any damn union here. Anything that's going to stop work, it'll kill this town, right? And then in the American factory, there was a senator that came out, and then right at the end, he said, we don't want any, or we're hoping this will be a union shop, and that's what we'll get here, right? And then of course all the American management team were like, he wasn't supposed to say that, and they were furious about him, right?
Yeah.
And they were all the ones that ended up getting fired. Like it's insane, right? And what do you think of the? I think this sort of moved into a. It moved into a film more or less centered on the people's battle for a union. What do you think of that?
Yes, it did actually. It did. Yes, and that just highlights the fact that the Americans are more about proper working conditions over profit, and then the Chinese are over profit over proper working conditions.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think ultimately you could say that the union is almost their move to bring in a union is almost a metaphor for nationalizing industry, or it's almost a metaphor against, say, multiculturalism, right? Because all of the workers there was, what was it, 12, there was about 1,200 American workers there, and they had a vote for a union, and 800 of them voted against it.
They were afraid.
Yeah, they're either confused or afraid, or I don't know, but I mean,
they're just so grateful for that $12.
Yeah, they're grateful for the $12, which became $14, but then that was it. And yeah, I think the movement towards the union is almost a metaphor for the America First movement, in that it seems like such an obvious thing, but it was so roundly attacked by so many people, right? Because it sort of morphs into something different, like America First means everybody else last, or stuff like that, right? And in the same way that the union is portrayed as a barrier between you and management. This way, with the union there, you can't talk directly to management.
Right.
I mean, as if you could anyways, right? Like the only conversation you have with management is you're fired.
Exactly. It's like, oh, you have a problem, go to HR. I'm like, that means I'll be fired shortly after my discussion. Everybody knows that.
So, I mean, it's a pretty black-pilling film, in all honesty. I mean, how do you see as the natural progression just for people like this and the rest of America?
Well, I think the natural progression is that uh, uh, people in those positions are not going to be able to work fast enough. They're not going to be able to meet the numbers. Automation is already in progress. Their jobs are all going to be automated. They're going to be out of work. So all these jobs and all these factories that Trump wanted to bring back are obsolete ideas in terms of creating an income for yourself. There should be training on how to help people get with the future, not bring back this old industry that worked when it did, but doesn't work here anymore.
But now in a country with 330 million people, like, I mean, how can you, what do you do with everybody?
Well, what is it? The universal basic income?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, someone's going to have to pay for that though, right? And I mean, just when you look at all those workers there, I mean, what can they do, Like, I mean,
I don't know. It's pretty dismal, actually. It's one big
yeah.
fat black pill.
Yeah, it was sad when one guy was talking about his daughter made 40 grand a year and he makes 27.
She was doing nails.
Yeah, she's doing nails. And I mean, 20 years ago, he would have been making 60 grand, right? Without overtime.
Yeah, I mean, it's very dehumanizing. I don't know. I think that there's going to be a lot more poverty here. I think things are going to decline more for sure. The younger generation, they'll be doing better because they're with the times. They're being trained in jobs that are not going to be obsolete, or if not obsolete yesterday, pretty much,
But are they though? I mean, so many of those tech jobs can just be, probably replaced by AI pretty soon.
Yeah.
Or else H-1B visas, right?
True.
That's the biggest problem with globalism. And that, if anything, that's what it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for globalism, right? And I mean, they can't. The problem with globalism is there's always something more efficient, right? And embracing something more efficient or something better means that you have to discard something else. And
Yeah.
like if I took that approach with my family, right? Like, let's say, well, I got 4 kids and they do okay in school, but sorry guys, I can bring in 4 other kids that'll get straight A's, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess and they eat less than you guys too. So I guess the logical thing would be to bring in those kids that do more homework, get better grades, and eat less, right? But
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, you have to recognize that your nation is your family, don't you?
Yes, you do. You do have to write. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, there are a lot of people here that feel that way. And there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad in this country. There's a lot of both. I just really don't, I have no idea what's going to happen with these poor people, or myself for that matter. Who knows what's going to happen in 10 years? Yeah. It doesn't look good though.
No. Okay. Well, why don't we end it on your wise words there? We do not know what is going to happen in the future for them or for us. We may be facing a future as drones making $12 an hour, all of us, living in dilapidated houses, driving Ubers in our spare time, right?
We're not even going to be driving Ubers. It's going to be automated.
Yeah, that's right. Automated. I don't know. I mean,
I started having this conversation with an Uber driver in Florida 3 years ago. I went for my birthday last minute, and I tried to talk to him about it. And he was a retired architect who was Uber driving just to make a little extra retirement money. And he was violently opposed to having this conversation with me at all. And I don't know. It's a soft spot for a lot of people. But you know what? In this time with the coronavirus, there are some advancements that are happening that could possibly help us in the future. We're already seeing how our money can be spent to keep people afloat. Right now, I'm not doing bad at all. I'm one of those people that actually got on unemployment pretty quickly, and I'm getting paid weekly right now to stay home, basically.
So essentially you're saying that the coronavirus has been great because it's eliminating a lot of the extra population.
No!
Sorry. I thought that was the point.
No, I'm saying that it's like forcing us to think about these things as they're doling out money to everybody here.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see when the bill comes due, right? Or maybe there won't be a bill. Maybe they can just print money, or I guess move debt around from one decimal place to the other endlessly, right? Maybe it never matters.
Who knows?
At
Yeah.
some point, there has to be something real in the world. Some real stuff has to be built, right? Like food
Right.
and whatever. So I
Yeah.
don't know. There's got to be an end somewhere. We're not going to figure it out today, but
Nope.
hopefully we will one day, right?
Yeah, there's really just so much up in the air right now. I mean, holy cow.
Yes, holy cow, holy cat, dog. Holy day, Easter, for all our Christian friends out there, our Apollonian friends. Thanks for watching. This has been the Culture Cast. Yes, and the kids.
Yeah, all
And
right.
be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Angie will be back next week, right, Angie?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. See you later.
Adios.